Too hipster. Oh, I don't get it. I'll get lynched for that. 2012. Why is this even in here? Nobody cares. Don't even remember writing this. Aha! There we go. This is terrible. Well, better than nothing. Let's go make it. Hello there, everyone. X-Men! Yeah! This series isn't dead yet! Yay! I'm so glad! X-Men 3 is the red-headed stepchild of the X-Men family. Aside from maybe the Wolverine, this is the X-Men film that everybody pays the least attention to. People I talk to say that it's bad, but they don't really have that much to say about it that don't include the words Phoenix and Saga. That's not to say that said element of the story isn't bad, but there's more to it than that. X-Men 1 was the film that started the whole series. X-Men 2 was the perfect sequel. X-Men 3 is... well, I don't know. But I'm here to find out. What is X-Men The Last Stand's place in the X-Men saga, as well as its ranking on this list? And it's not just the franchise enter, because that's impossible. The problem I have with writing the script and making this video is that nobody seems to like this movie. Across the board, there's almost universal disdain for X-Men 3.
Recoil as the spoiled hack douchebag takes the reins of the beloved franchise, only to kill off your favorite characters, leave out your favorite characters, and depower your favorite characters.
I had to.
All while completely butchering the Phoenix Saga.
Everybody just doesn't like it. So, killing it with fire like the rest of the internet does would be a moot point. It's been done. Instead of doing that, I'm gonna do something a little bit different. I'm gonna go on the premise that we all already know that the movie's not good. I'm not gonna try to prove that to you. We all already know that. So, I'm just gonna try and take you behind the scenes to explore this movie and explain why. Because this movie is fascinating to me. It is the definition of a mixed bag. Let's explain why. Part 1, A Tale of Two Screenwriters. I'd say that X-Men The Last Stand is a mixed bag in more ways than one. Not only is it a mixed bag of good and bad elements, but it's also a mixed bag of plots, storylines, and characters that don't really mesh or mix well together. And this stems from the beginnings of the film. After Bryan Singer left and took the X-Men 2 screenwriters with him to ruin Superman for Warner Brothers, Simon Kinberg and Zach Penn were hired to write this script. The problem is, they were writing two stories into one. Juggling storylines is hard, especially in a movie. And especially when the two screenwriters disagreed on which story should be the main one. Simon Kinberg favoring Dark Phoenix and Zach Penn favoring the Gifted storyline. And even the Fox executives got in on this party, and they decided to force upon the screenwriters the idea that the Gifted storyline should be the focus because it's more family-friendly for a PG summer popcorn flick. And that's the problem, is there's no narrative focus to this story. In X-Men 1 and X-Men 2, it's pretty clear that Wolverine is the main character, for better or for worse. He's the point of view character, and the story's pace and movement is driven by his growth as a character. In X-Men 3, he's still the point of view character, for the most part, but he doesn't really have any growth or development. In fact, I'd say that Storm should have been the main character because she's the one who has the growth and development. But he's still the point of view characters, so they're still splitting main character duties between them, and it's just confusing and stupid. More than having no main character, this movie has no main plot. Plot 1 is the Cure storyline where Worthington Labs... This is a comic book movie. So, conglomerate corporations are involved in everything from filmmaking to pharmaceuticals to heavy weaponry to everything. They're kind of prophetic in a way. And then Worthington Labs develops an antibody that can suppress mutant abilities, and this results in a lot of chaos and controversy, eventually wrapping up Magneto in it after Mystique is hit with a Cure gun. Magneto then decides to go full terrorist on us and attack the Cure and get rid of it. I haven't read the comic book that this is based off, but it is an interesting idea. It makes the conflict a little bit more nuanced than just good mutants versus evil humans, or good mutants versus bad mutants. It's those who believe that conformity is better versus those who believe that individuality is better. And really, both sides are correct. So that's interesting. And I think they were trying to explore this, especially with Rogue's subplot, but she barely gets 2 scenes. Now, no. We have to make room for Iceman's new beard, which is Kitty Pryde, who has even less relevance to the story. But at least they can be beards for each other now. Plot 2 is the Dark Phoenix Saga, where Jean Grey is revealed to not have died at Alkali Lake as in the last movie, as everybody with a brain and a vague knowledge of the X-Men franchise would have guessed. After French kissing Cyclops to death and burying any possibility for James Marsden's version of the character to be ever taken seriously, Phoenix is just released, I guess. Yep. That's it. She's just released. She tries to bone Wolverine, and then she's just off doing stuff. Nothing all that interesting, just sort of standing around, sitting in chairs, looking mysterious and angry. Oh, and she kills Professor X for no reason. Like, no reason at all. He just yells at her, and then she tears him up for being angry or something. Did I mention that this was written by Simon Kinberg? The man who is now officially writing and directing the X-Men Dark Phoenix film? Set for next year? I feel in safe hands, too. The point of this whole tangent is that X-Men 3 is a bit of a mess narratively. It almost feels like the plot is a football being tossed between 2 people. In one scene, we advance the Cure plot. In the next, we toss the football to the other guy and we get a scene about the Dark Phoenix plot. Then it's tossed back and there's another scene dedicated to the Cure plot. Rinse and repeat. This kind of plot structure is okay in a TV show or a miniseries or even a book, where there's more time to develop each plot and tie them together, but it isn't ideal for a movie. The film format has very specific constraints that don't apply to a lot of other forms of media, which is through the 3-act structure. And unless you're an art house filmmaker like Wes Anderson or Paul Thomas Anderson or any other Anderson besides Paul W.S., it's good to stick to that. Especially in an action movie that's meant for the casual moviegoer who doesn't really like to think about the movie they're watching too much. This is the first reason why I don't think a lot of people understand this or like this movie very much. It's just a little bit too complicated and convoluted. People like easy-to-digest action movies that are fun. That's why, for better or for worse, Star Trek 2009 was so successful compared to Star Trek the Motion Picture. Recently, I rewatched X-Men 3 with my dad, and during the screening, he had a lot of trouble remembering the movie. I tried to explain the plot to him. It's the one where Captain Picard dies, and the one where they have the cure to mutantism. And then Jean Grey becomes, Dark Phoenix, and then Magneto decides to attack Alcatraz after Mystique is shot with the cure that was developed from the mutant kid. It shouldn't be this hard to describe the plot of a summer action movie. Now let's compare this to Logan, which is a movie that is a lot more sophisticated and adult. But, again, easier to digest. So basically the plot is that Wolverine, who lives in obscurity with an aging Professor X, is called into action once again when a child named Laura asks for help. They run away, traveling across America to try and escape to the Canadian border. There we go. Easy. Now that's not to say that Logan is by any means a dumb movie, and yes, there are more nuances to it than that, but my point is that you understand what the plot is. It's easy to to describe to your dad, who walks in halfway through the screening, what is happening, so that they shut up and they stop bothering you about what the plot is so you can just watch the movie! Part 2, the directorial equivalent of buttered spaghetti. Now, if a bad, overcomplicated screenplay were the end of this movie's problems, I might be able to understand this movie, or at least enjoy it a bit more. Because a lot of bad movies, bad scripts have been made better by having a good director. Prometheus is the number one example of this. Like, no matter how much Ridley Scott tries, he can't mitigate the idiocy of the script, but he does make the movie as a whole better. Scott did the best that he could to try to make everything around the script as high quality as he could, with shot choices, excellent action, and good acting. Brett Ratner didn't do that. I think that Brett Ratner gets a bad rap. People talk about him the same way they talk about Michael Bay or Guy Ritchie. They say he single-handedly ruined the X-Men saga in this film. I disagree. What he did was far worse than simply ruining the X-Men franchise. He allowed other people to ruin it. He didn't stop them. Now, let's explain that. I believe that there's a spectrum of directors and their talent. They run from good to bad. Like, at the left, there might be, like, Ridley Scott, Matthew Vaughn, directors like that who have talent, and they're, of course, various on that spectrum. And, of course, on the other side, there's directors like Michael Bay, Guy Ritchie, people like that. But it's directly in the middle is people like Brett Ratner and David Yates. He is neither good nor bad. His directorial efforts can best be compared to a plate of buttered spaghetti. If a film is a plate of food, then a director is the head chef of the kitchen. He takes a recipe, a script, and translates the recipe into a piece of food, either by himself or with the aid of others. Although he isn't directly responsible for coming up with the idea, he is instrumental in realizing it. A good recipe can be made into a bad dish by a bad chef. A bad recipe can be made into a decent dish by a good chef, and it's the same with movies. Brett Ratner is neither good nor bad. His directing is like a chef who just makes buttered pasta. You remember when restaurants used to offer buttered pasta, which is just pasta with some butter on it? Yes, it's technically food, but there's no real taste to it whatsoever aside from a little bit of butter. So while it does technically serve the purpose that food has in nourishing a person's body, it does so in the bare minimum required. There aren't really any cool sauces or spices to make it tasty, and there aren't really any vegetables or protein to make it particularly healthy. It's just a plate of pasta, which is pretty gross. And this is the way that Brett Ratner directs X-Men 3. He does the bare minimum in that he directs this movie, sets up shots, and tells the actors what to do. But it's done so indifferently that there's barely any personality or style in the way that the movie looks. Take this scene, for example, where Cyclops is being bombarded telepathically by Jean Grey Phoenix. Now, I'm going to play a small excerpt from this scene in its entirety. And I know that this will tick off the copyright censors, but please bear with me. There's a point that I have to make, and I'm using no more of the clip than absolutely necessary. Play the clip. See? It's just boring. It cuts from a medium shot of Cyclops to a wide shot from behind to a close-up to a wide shot. There's no rhyme or rhythm to the shot structure. It doesn't really reflect the audio of Jean Grey shouting at Cyclops inside his head, and it doesn't really visually show his struggles. I'd even say that the wide shots damage the overall idea that they're going for because they disguised or hid James Marsden's performance in the rest of the scenery. It's cutting for the sake of cutting. There's no purpose, or, dare I say it, direction to the shot choices. It's pointless and it's dumb. That's why it feels so weird and out of place when Cyclops rips off his glasses and shoots the lasers at the water to stop it. The visual storytelling doesn't reflect Cyclops and his internal state and emotions, and that's what's lost with a director like Brett Ratner. It might look good, but there's no visual storytelling in a Ratner film. Now, I'm sorry, but this excerpt really fascinated me, so I'm going to provide some counterexamples to just show how bad it is. I know it was like 30 seconds at the very most of a scene that happens early on and nobody really remembers or cares about, but this failure of filmmaking really fascinated me. This is really puzzling. To show why this doesn't work, so I'm going to reenact the scene as I would direct it.
Stop. Stop it. Stop it. Stop!
See? I hate to toot my own horn, but wasn't that so much better? And that's because this version uses visual storytelling to its advantage. Now, I chose to reflect the confusing and overwhelming nature of basically having somebody shout at you inside your own head by cutting rapidly back and forth to various camera angles around his Cyclops. I like it. See, Xavier, Cyclops, Zyclops. I love it. The idea is that each shot represents Jean Grey's telepathically assaulting Cyclops from each of these different angles. And once again, I hate to compliment myself, but I did this with no money and next to no filmmaking experience. And it's not just me either. I can think of numerous examples of other shows and movies taking advantage of the visual medium in film when portraying telepathy. Like this clip from that one science fiction show from the 90s that nobody's watched except for me.
It's a risk. I mean, even though Zahadum has been abandoned, we don't know what they left behind. We're gonna have to have more information before we can try this.
Information or not, I don't think you should go back there. You barely got out the last time. Look, we can send someone else, right? No one else knows the area.
The point that I'm trying to make is that Brett Ratner has absolutely no idea where to put the camera, which makes whatever emotion or idea the screenplay is trying to express vague and aimless at best. It is the director's job, it is his job, what he is paid for, to create a visual story through choice, acting, and other on-screen elements. And it is for this failure that Brett Ratner is such a bad director. He fails to make us remember anything at all. So while this film does technically look good and it's nice to finally have colors, the movie is just overall boring in terms of aesthetic. The last two X-Men films had a distinct visual style to them, and even X-Men Origins Wolverine did. Granted that movie's visual storytelling and color palette was terrible, but at least it did have an aesthetic. And this movie just looks boring. The effects are good, but they're not filmed in a very interesting way. So if Michael Bay makes disgusting Taco Bell fast food and Wes Anderson cooks food for that hipster restaurant that you went to that one time and paid way too much for, then Brett Ratner bakes buttered pasta. Yes, it's technically food, but that's about it. So let's sum it all up. It's very hard to review this movie. This is the third time that I had to delete my entire script and try all over again. The reason for this is that it barely feels like a movie. It's several different movies that wrestle with each other for characters, screen time, and special effects. There's nothing that ties any of it together. Is it about Professor X? Is it about Storm? Is it about Wolverine? Is it about Cyclops? Is it about Iceman? Is it about Kitty? Is it about Rogue? Is it about Magneto? The answer is yes. And no. To all of them. And none of them. Even though X-Men 1 and X-Men 2 were visually busy action movies crowded with characters and stories, they did have focus. They were driven by the growth of one character over the course of one story. This movie doesn't do that. I'd like to rant about this movie and call it bad, but it isn't. I have to say that a lot of these elements are very cool and work very well on their own. Halle Berry gives the best performance that she ever gave in any of these movies. Magneto is given some great development as well. Kelsey Grammer as Beast is also excellent. I even enjoyed what they did with Dark Phoenix. Those changes, yeah, they don't bug me. But the problem with all of these is that they're not given enough room to breathe. There's always something else that needs to be done in some other story, in some other plot, in some other part of the movie. So there's no downtime, and there's no development for anything, and it's because of that. It's worse than a bad movie. It's barely a movie at all. So when it came to rank this movie, I placed it 4th, which is above X-Men 1 and below X-Men 2. I was surprised by this at first, but thinking back, I understand. X-Men 1 was technically a better put together movie, but it's just more boring. I remember very little about X-Men 1. X-Men 3, by contrast, has some memorable moments, even if they're only memorably bad. And you know what I'm talking about there.
Don't you know who I am? I'm the Juggernaut, bitch!